We're live. Okay, perfect. All right, here we go.
Okay.
Hold on one second. I don't see your stream. Two people recording. Make sure. Okay. Awesome. All right, here we go. In three, two, one. Hello and welcome to another episode of the CBO Speaks podcast. I'm your host, Donna Shealy, and glad to be with you again. Today's guest is Todd Kilburn. He's the Chief Financial Officer for Kentucky Community and Technical College System. Hello, Todd. Welcome.
Hi, Donna. Thanks for the invitation. I appreciate it.
Oh, we are so happy to have you with us. So let's go back to your career path and experience. I always like to start there. You've had an impressive career in higher education finance. Can you walk us through your career journey and how it led you to your current role as CFO for the Kentucky Community and Technical College System?
Certainly.
Yes.
I began working in higher ed, just teaching some classes in a small non-accredited institution, but found myself working at Dartmouth College as in the community service, religious life area, and in student employment. Really loved it. Went to a school in Colorado called Naropa University,
Mm-hmm.
where I served as a kind of chief of staff. And because I had an MBA, they asked me to consider taking on the CFO role because I'd been doing a lot of work with that. Stepped into that role, really found that I loved it. Um, and I loved the aspect of thinking about the philosophy and strategy of the organization and how finance supports that
Mm-hmm.
rather than just finance being an end to itself. Worked there for 6 years, wound up in northern Idaho at a small state college.
Mm-hmm.
So I went from a private institution to a public institution, a 4 year. And from there, I was asked to serve at the state board level. So I worked for the Idaho State Board of Education for several years, did a brief stint through with a seminary in Minnesota, and then was really intrigued by the idea of the Kentucky system. It was a large system. Working with the different institutions was something that I really loved.
Mm-hmm.
And so talked to them, interviewed this last spring, and the rest is history. I wound up here in beautiful Kentucky, a little warmer than Minnesota,
Yeah.
which I'm looking forward to in January and February. But it's been great thus far.
Oh, good. Oh, good. Yeah, you won't have as much snow, for sure.
That is for sure. That is for sure.
Yeah, well, wow. So, you've done so much. Many CBOs today are moving between institutions or into new roles. From your perspective, how has the role of a chief business officer evolved over time?
One of the things that I think has caused it to evolve is there are so many pieces that seem to continue uh, to find their way into the role of the chief financial officer or the CBO at a particular school.
Mhm.
I think as we start looking at things like compliance, we start looking at things like Title IX, Clery Act, all of those things in many institutions fall under, to some degree, under the chief financial officer. But then there's much more strategic thinking. I think higher education is changing and growing and morphing as students are doing the same.
Mhm.
I don't think it's anymore that you used to show up at a school and they told you what your courses were and you took them and you finished. Now students are crafting their own futures and helping develop their own strategies
Mm.
for growth.
Mhm.
And so part of the role of the chief financial officer, I think, has changed in that we're now addressing some of those needs and trying to think through strategically how do we really support our students? How are we thinking about what we're doing, not just in the academic area, but in our business practices and working with first generation college students. So many of those areas, I think, are critical for a chief financial officer to focus.
Mhm.
So I've even in the time that I've been in a CFO role, I've seen that shift, and it seems as though that's gaining momentum. That it's just requiring more and more resourcefulness on the
Yeah.
part of the chief business officer.
Yeah. That's wow. That's very true. So, speaking of that, let's talk about your current role and everything that you oversee at Kentucky Community and Technical College System.
Within Kentucky, all of the community and technical colleges, and there are 16 of them,
Mm-hmm.
all work collaboratively with our system office.
Mm-hmm.
And so I oversee four particular areas. One involves treasury management, which is the bank reconciliations. One has to do with just the managing of budget. One has to do with accounts payable and procurement. And then the last is facilities support services, which includes all kinds of things around our facilities.
Mm-hmm.
And as a member of the cabinet, that also involves thinking about strategic planning. It's working with the business officers at the various colleges. It's making sure that we're building policy that's compliant with state regulation, and trying to maintain all of those things while at the same time finding ways to support the 16 colleges and 70 campuses that the
Mm.
system includes.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot to be done. There's a lot of support. What I'm seeking to bring to this particular role is a true sense of collaboration with our institutions, trying to help them be successful where they are,
Mm-hmm.
even though they're very varied in their particular needs and locations. So it's great. We have 85,000 full-time equivalent students
Mm.
in the system. If you include dual credit, we're over 100,000 students in the system. 300 buildings plus to manage. There's quite a bit
Mm-hmm.
to manage here at the system office, and so it's really working to try to think both strategically, but help with the on the ground role of what our campuses are doing.
My goodness. Well, I know, Todd, that you recently transitioned into this new role at KCTCS. So, what were some of the key challenges or surprises you encountered during this transition, and how did you navigate that?
Well, I'd say I'm still navigating that, but I think really the biggest challenge is just, and for me, it's understanding the context of what's gone before.
Mhm.
How did things work together? Where were some of the tension points? How can we build a way and a path forward?
Mhm.
It's understanding just the state of Kentucky and statutes,
Mhm.
and what the actual requirements are. Where do we have to draw a line? Where do we have some flexibility? And it's learning a lot of people and building relationships, which I
Yeah.
think is absolutely crucial to being successful in this role. And so it's
Mhm.
getting to know people and talk with them, and let them know that we're here to help and to support. And I know sometimes that's not always easy on either end. And so it's just learning to work together, talk together, and try to find how we move forward together as a system.
Yeah, I hear that a lot about building relationships. I know that is so vitally important. And as someone who's taken on multiple CBO roles,
Mhm.
how do you prepare for a new position, particularly when it involves a shift to a new institution? Like, how do you prepare for that?
Well, I think a lot of it is just it's doing good homework. It's reading, checking out all the documentation you can possibly find. Um, Lots of times it's reading between the lines
Mm,
of sometimes when there's a lot of detail around a particular issue, you may sense that they've had a problem with that issue in the past, and how do we come in and fix that?
mhm,
It's trying to get a sense of who the people are, and where the strengths are, and where maybe an institution hasn't been as effective. KCTCS is 25, 26 years old,
mhm,
still, forging a path for our 2-year institutions.
mhm,
And so it's a lot of it is getting to know those campuses and understand what's going on. So we have larger schools for example, in Louisville and Lexington,
mhm.
some smaller campuses in other locations around the state, and the needs vary. But it's really trying to understand, what's gone on, what the leadership looks like.
Mhm,
There's a lot of transition in the system now. We have a new president as of the 1st of January of 24,
mhm,
and a number of other positions that have been filled. So part of it is actually trying to find the right cadence with the people around me to make sure that we're all working together in the roles that we have here in the system office.
Mhm.
And preparing is just, like I say, it's trying to do homework, it's trying to research, but it's also, sometimes it's just conversations, just
Yeah.
having those conversations ahead of time. Yeah.
Yeah. And what advice would you give to a new or aspiring CBO who's preparing for their first transition into the leadership position, particularly in navigating the, complexities of different institutions? What advice
Mhm.
would you give?
Well, when I was considering my first CFO role, I
Mhm.
knew a controller and said to her, "What do you think is the most important characteristic of a chief business officer?" And
Mhm.
surprisingly to me, she said resourcefulness,
Mm.
and which I've already alluded to. And at the time, I thought, well, that's not what I would have thought. But I realized every day brings new challenges. There are new
Mhm.
things that come up. There are new issues in our culture. There are, it's being a chief business officer during COVID and during the time of the pandemic required a lot
Mhm.
of creativity and a lot of finding things out and figuring out what to do.
Mhm.
And so, to someone who's looking to step into this role, I would say it's finding ways to be resourceful. And so, one of the ways I've tried to do that is I have people that I've gotten to know who have experience in different areas, whether it be financial or capital planning or budgeting, that
Mhm.
I can call on and just say, "How have you done this?" Um,
Yeah.
and I'll put in a little plug, even though I wasn't asked to, for Nakubo, and
Mhm.
say, I've learned a lot at Nakubo. I often go and just sit down at a table with people that I've never met and
Mhm.
ask them and talk to them about things. And lots of times, people have raised an issue or talked about an expertise that's something where I feel like I could use some expertise to reach out and to contact people.
Mhm.
So it's being not afraid to say, "Hey, I could use some advice or some counsel here, some direction," um, and and it's really trying to figure out how do I do this in a way that ultimately is for the benefit of the students.
Mhm.
I really do try to surround myself with people who are student centric
Yeah.
because it's really easy to forget that when you're working on a budget.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. For sure. Well, speaking of Nakubo, data from the Nakubo CBO profile indicates that more CBOs are eyeing lateral moves rather
Mhm.
than retirement.
Mhm.
What factors in your experience make lateral moves appealing, and how do they contribute to career longevity in the field?
I think, and I wouldn't say that I'm anywhere near an expert on this, but from
Mhm.
from my colleagues and people with whom I speak, I think for a lot of them, it's what's the next challenge, and
Mm.
what actually keeps me engaged in what I'm doing. And sometimes you may have a particular area or particular competencies that you try to bring to a role, and
Mhm.
you get to a place and you try to instill those and work with them. Uh, but there may come a time where you say, "All right, now this particular position requires something different than my
Mhm.
my set of skills." And there's something over here that looks really interesting to me where I can bring my set of skills to bear.
Mhm.
Um, but I think for a lot of people, it really is just that. How can I continue to be engaged? How can I continue to work and do the things that I really want to do? And for me, I love discussions around strategy. I know sometimes
Mhm.
that makes some people crazy, and let's not talk about what we're going to do. Let's just go do it. But I like doing both. I like helping to set the strategy, and so as I've made those considerations, I want to find a place where I can be a strategic thought partner
Mhm.
in helping the institution advance its goals and its mission.
Yeah. Well, I wanna talk a little bit about that more, and you kinda touched on this a little earlier, but as the CFO of a large community and technical college system, how do you balance that financial leadership, with the broader institutional goals of student success and access to education? I know you talked about, you are for student success, so how do you balance that?
Well, and that's a really good question, and depending on the day you ask me, I might feel slightly differently about that.
Right.
Um, but but I
Yeah.
think it's about first, how do we wisely steward our resources in a
Mm.
way that actually makes college accessible and affordable for students.
Mhm.
So how can we work together to try to keep costs down, to try to make school available, make an education available for students?
Mhm.
And how do we do that in a way that when a student leaves our institution, they actually have a sense of their path forward?
Mhm.
Um, and but a lot of times, we're trying to balance that. At the same time, we're trying to make sure we follow good business practices, we follow good policy and legal strategies, and so that can be a really challenging issue.
Mhm.
And here at the system office, it can be challenging to remember that what we're doing here is for the students when we don't necessarily have students in the building very often.
Mm.
Um, is one of the things that I miss about working in an institution. I love seeing and chatting with students,
Yeah.
but it's remembering this is why we do what we do. It's not just to build a big bank account. It's not
Mhm.
just to do all these other things. It really is about how do we build accessibility for students so that they can be successful in their lives.
Yeah. Well, Todd, you talked about strategy a little earlier and how you like strategy, and I want to know how has your approach to financial strategy changed with the increasing focus on cost efficiency and sustainability, those buzzwords we're hearing in higher education right now.
Right.
What is your strategy?
Well, I think there's several things.
Okay.
I think strategy comes down to do we have are we how are we really thinking about what we're doing and how that
Mhm.
impacts students? So here at KCTCS, we're not just trying to be good partners with our colleges and work with our colleges. We're trying to be good partners with our industry and in workforce development so that we're
Mhm.
paving paths forward for our students.
Mhm.
And so it's trying to invest in those kinds of relationships.
Yeah.
It's trying to find ways that we can develop programming that actually meets some of the economic needs of the place where we live. And here in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, it's looking at what are some of those key positions that are out there, and how can we get students into those positions, and help train them in a way where they will not only get there, but they'll be successful in their particular
Yeah.
role. And so I'm great. It's good for me to have great colleagues around me who are having many of those conversations.
Mhm.
But we're trying to think about, well, how do we tell that story? How do we speak to students? And then how do we build those pathways for our students in the work that we're doing? And so finance supports all of that and tries to create the foundation and the groundwork for it.
Mhm.
But you know, we don't always get to see the student who comes through the door and graduates with a certificate or an associate's degree who can
Mhm.
go out and make a difference in the world. But we like hearing those stories. And
Yes.
so it really is. I mean, I think for me, strategy is ultimately about um, how are we thinking about the process of a student from the time they apply to the time they're out of school and in the workforce. How do we make them as successful as we possibly
Mhm. Well, that's good.
can?
What is one leadership lesson you've learned throughout your career that continues to guide you today in your role as a CBO?
One leadership lesson. I think. Well, I'll just say the first thing that comes to mind is
Mhm.
that I think good leadership requires that a leader is humble,
Mm.
um, but actually provides direction for the people around that leader. And so, in my particular career, I've really tried to work closely with the people that I oversee and the people who are my colleagues, and to really try to find a way to be a leader who's not just saying, here's the direction we're going to take, you know, hope you like it. If not, too bad. But it's really
Mhm.
engaging people in that journey together. It's how
Yeah.
can we do this better? What things can we do to make our life easier and support the people around us.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's there's somebody who's facing a particularly difficult work situation, and
Mhm.
it's some of us standing by them or going to lunch together. Some particular cases, it's just trying to provide a little extra motivation in a time where people are really tired and it's very busy.
Mhm.
But I think we do so much better when we work together
That's right.
in everything that we're doing. And so for me, leadership, I've really discovered, is about how do I bring people with me to
Mhm.
accomplish things and to be successful together and not care about who gets the credit. It's
Yeah,
really about how do I step back and let people shine.
that's great. That's good. I love that. Well, looking ahead, what excites you most about the future of higher ed and your role within it?
Well, I think I'm excited about um, I'm excited that people are having what I think are deeper and more meaningful conversations around what's in the best interest of the student.
Mhm.
Um, as I say, it used to be that someone would go in and they would take these courses. Now we're watching students develop different kinds of degrees or bring pieces from lots of different experience to try to craft a particular pathway forward.
Mhm.
There's so many new kinds of fields that students can find themselves invested in.
Yeah.
And so, what I find exciting is that um, there's a bright future for our students
Mhm.
if we can just sometimes get out of our own way and help them be successful rather than
Mhm.
trying to tell them what success is.
Ah,
And so, how do we get them into the workplace? How do we get them to do the things that they really want to do that will
mhm.
help them generate a life that they enjoy?
Yeah,
And if we're successful at that, I think we take some great joy in that.
that's awesome. Well, Todd, any final thoughts or advice you'd like to share with aspiring CBOs or your peers?
Um, well, I guess one is like again, don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be
Mhm.
afraid to take on something new. Um, I came to this role a little later in life than many people did, and was told on a couple of occasions, well, I'm not sure at this point in your life you're ready to take this on.
Mhm.
I would say, sometimes people make you feel like you don't belong.
Yeah.
If you wind up in that role, step into it, own it, take it, and run with it. Do the very best that you can. Try to be the kind of leader that generates respect and trust,
Mhm.
um, and try to enjoy what you're doing. I'm kind of known for telling bad dad jokes throughout the office, but I think sometimes in the business role we can be pretty self-focused and a little bit dour, and I think we need to actually have some fun and enjoyment in what we do. And so I try to bring that to the people that I work with, and they roll
Mhm.
their eyes at me a lot, but we but it winds up being a great thing, I think, when we're just human. And
That's right.
and yeah, so we step
Yeah.
into the role, do the best that we can, but not be afraid to be human.
Not be afraid to be human. All right, you gotta give us a dad joke as we close out.
Okay, I crossbred a homing pigeon with an alligator.
Uh-huh.
That's going to come back to bite me.
But
And
bum.
Donna, I never proclaim that they're good. I just say they're dad jokes.
Hey, listen, I laughed. How about that? Well,
Okay,
thank
thank you.
thank you, Todd. And
Okay.
thank you all for joining us for this episode of CBO Speaks. It's brought to you by the National Association of College and University Business Officers. You can find resources for today's episode, as well as a wide variety of research and tools at nakubo.org. Make sure you subscribe to CBO Speaks wherever you get your podcasts, and so that you can get the latest episodes instantly. And on behalf of Todd Kilburn, Chief Financial Officer for Kentucky Community and Technical College System, I want to thank you for joining us on CBO Speaks. I'm Donna Shealy. Be well. Awesome. Let me stop that. Perfect. End stream. Did we do that right?